What is that exactly that you're referring to?
The Degel Machane Ephraim it's a really good question. He is the Hasidic commentary that I have been teaching for the last year. So Beverly, you have been to a couple of sessions with me. And in those sessions, the commentary that we've been looking at is the grandchild or of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidism. That's who we're looking at. And it's not easy, but I think we've been learning each week. So,
why do we want the Hasidic version? Wouldn't that be different than we're a conservative temple, right? Isn't Hasidic more orthodox?
no, this has nothing to do. This was way before there were even the development of movements. We're talking 18th century. This has nothing to do with conservative reform or orthodox. I'm not talking about Chabad. However, you raise a very interesting question. And I think the question behind your question is, are there limits to who we can study as conservative Jews, or can we study any commentary? And I'm of the opinion that Jewish commentary is Jewish commentary, whether it comes from the perspective of a Reform commentator or an Orthodox commentator. I believe there's always something to learn from our co-religionists. So as long as the Torah is meaningful and rich and connects to our life, what does it matter what the observant practice is of the person who created the commentary? I'll give you another example, Beverly. Rabbi Vogel, over the years in his class, has taught Nechama Leibovitz. Nechama Leibovitz was an Orthodox Jew. So should he be teaching the commentary of an Orthodox Jew, even though you're not Orthodox? Of course not, because her commentary is rich and very, very meaningful and enlightening. So, Stan.
Possibly the most studied commentary is Rabbi Sachs, or Jonathan Sachs, whose website, is used over and over and still maintained weekly. So
correct, and he was an Orthodox Jew, and you can say the same thing about Rashi, the first biblical major commentator, where you don't read the Torah without Rashi's commentary, and he was also a traditional Jew. Again, way before there were movements, Rashi was writing, in the 1100s. But I think that anybody who offers us wisdom, we should grab and take advantage of. So let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And again, Beverly, thank you. I love the question, and I am grateful that you shared it. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen.
I'm turning off my screen because I'm eating lunch.
Well, we will miss you, but I totally respect that.
But I'm on audio.
Okay, good. All right, can you all see this? Okay, so this week, the Degel Machane Ephraim, or should I say Rabbi Feinsmith from the IJS, the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, who is the one who's bringing forth the texts every week, decided to choose a comment from the Haftarah, from the book of Isaiah, instead of one specifically from our Torah portion, Deuteronomy. But he bases his commentary, I believe, on something very important from our Torah portion, Re'eh. So if you look at the very first line of Deuteronomy, where it says, Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. That's the way our Torah portion begins. See, this day I set before you blessing and curse. So this is Moshe speaking on behalf of God, challenging the Israelites, like he does throughout the book of Deuteronomy, to make sure that they behave properly. They haven't thus far wandering in the wilderness, and Moshe knows, even though he doesn't know the future, he assumes that once again the Israelites will find it hard to follow God's laws. So much of Deuteronomy is kind of like that push and that challenge to behave and to listen. And in Re'eh, in our Torah portion for this coming Shabbat, there's a list of laws that Moses gives us, reminding us of how we should live our lives, how we should behave. But the beginning is just a challenge to say to the Israelites, it's up to you. If you observe God's mitzvot, you will feel blessing. If you don't observe God's mitzvot, you will know from curses. Now, we are not going to be speaking about the theology behind rewards and punishments, because the Degel Machane Ephraim moves us in a completely different direction. Instead of talking about blessings and curses and rewards and punishments, he talks about when we study Torah, how do we study Torah? Do we do it in a mindful way, or we do it in a mindless way? And by extension, how do we live our lives? Do we live our lives in a mindful way, or do we live our lives in a mindless way? And that's really what we're going to be looking at today. So let me ask you, before we even jump in, are you more mindful or less mindful when you walk through your day typically? What would you say? Yes, Leora, and then Bob. Leora, you have to unmute yourself.
I feel that I'm very mindful, very much.
That's excellent. Good. How do you stay mindful, Leora?
I think my brain just works like that. Even if I don't want to think about it, it comes back to me. Stay focused.
Okay. Rob, what about you?
I think it varies. It depends on what I'm doing at the time. If I'm doing something that's routine, driving to a class or something like that, I would say I'm less mindful than I am if I'm if I'm reading a book or watching a TV program or attending services. Although I have to admit, sometimes my mindfulness isn't as good as it could be, even at services. I will admit that.
You're not alone, Rob. Me too. And I'm leading the service, and sometimes I get distracted. So absolutely. Thank you. Lisa, what about you?
Thank you. My attempt is to try on a daily basis, if I can, to practice mindfulness. And oftentimes it doesn't work. And then sometimes I'm really happy to say it does. And I notice. And I'm more aware, and so.
I want to just reiterate what Lisa said, that in order to be mindful, we have to practice it, right? It's not something that just happens naturally, because it is very easy. Like as Rob said, we can get in the car and drive, and not even realize we got to where we got to by the time we get there. Or for me, I could open up a bag of potato chips, which is my vice, and I can go through half that bag without even realizing that I've gone through that bag, because I will eat it very mindlessly unless I'm aware from the outset. So that's an important point. Marilyn, yes. And then after Marilyn, we'll jump back into the text.
I'm more mindful when I wake up in the morning, because I, say Modani and go through some affirmations and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm mindful at that point. I'm grateful. And somewhere along the day, I'm not so mindful. I get distracted, but I try to be. I try to be mindful, but I know the first thing in the morning when I wake up, I'm mindful.
Yeah, and I think that's fairly common for many of us, to be focused and then to lose focus as the day goes on. So, okay, so back to the verse. I set before you blessing and curse. In Hebrew, there are two ways in which God addresses God's self in the Torah. Ani and Anochi. Where do we hear Anochi? Do you remember the first moment that we really get Anochi, George?
Is that the Ten Commandments?
Exactly. The
Yeah,
Ten
it's more
Commandments.
emphatic. It's a more emphatic way.
So it could be, right? George is asking, in his last response, he's actually inviting us to think about why would God use Anochi instead of Ani? And might it mean something more? Generally speaking, when God uses the word Anochi, it's emphatic and it carries with it a more powerful sense of the divine presence. And the first time we see that is in the Aseret HaDibrot, in the Ten Commandments, when God says, Anochi, Adonai Elohechem, Asher Hotzeti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim, I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt and brought you to slavery. Anochi. So here again, it's Anochi. Re'eh Anochi. See, I, not Ani, but I. And the Degel is going to use that Anochi to talk about what he talks about. So that's why I bolded it for everybody. Now he jumps in to the Haftarah. And I didn't share with you the whole Haftarah, but take a minute, read it on your own for a second.
Yeah.
Right. This is one of the Haftarot of in response to after Tisha B'Av. This is a Haftarah of comfort. God is reestablishing a relationship with the people of Israel. Okay, you got the idea, right? God is basically saying, even if I have punished you, don't fret. I am still your God, and I will watch over you and bring you back. Lisa,
Yeah, Rabbi,
yes.
that's 8 through 12, not 1 through 12.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Thank you. And I don't know if this is too basic a question. We can't do that for this moment, I will appreciate that. But when it says in the Haftarah that it's from Isaiah 8 through 12, being Isaiah 8 through 12, could you just tell me where what that kind of means, that the Haftarah is based on these?
It's a good question. So I did not give you the entire Haftarah. The entire Haftarah begins from Isaiah chapter 54. And I think it begins with verse 1. George, if you have the Chumash in front of you, you can tell us for sure.
Got the art scroll there. Oops.
Right. It begins with verse 1 and then carries through a number of verses. What I did, Lisa, is I just took one small section of the Haftarah that is going to be read this coming Shabbat, just to give you a sense of what it's all about. And so what I gave you is chapter 54 in the book of Isaiah, only these verses beginning verse 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, to give you a feel of what the prophet Isaiah is speaking about.
Okay, thank you.
And then the Haftarah ends, gets close to concluding with this one line, V'chol banaich limudei Adonai, v'rav shalom banaich. All your children shall be disciples of God, and great shall be the happiness of your children. Okay, and we're going to come back to that in a second. Yeah, Ziggy.
So I noticed it said my covenant of friendship. I don't remember ever hearing it termed that way.
Yeah, really. Thank you for pointing that out. It's so interesting. And you don't see that in the Torah, Ziggy, that expression, but you do find it, as you see here, in the prophets, because the prophets are speaking, especially when they are offering comfort to the Israelites. They're trying to help the Israelites reimagine, after the Jews have suffered, a God who will take care of them, and a God who will love them. And right, a covenant of friendship, what's the idea? In a friendship, it's long lasting, that it won't end even if there's disagreement, that may be moments of anger, but at the end of the day, a friend is a friend is a friend, and there's a loyalty that comes in the nature of that relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what Isaiah is trying to articulate. Yeah, George.
Yeah, now, just glancing at the Hebrew, I don't see the word friendship. So it might be a loose interpretation.
What is the Hebrew that you have in front of you?
What line are we looking at here?
You know what? I don't remember. And
My covenant, hold on, my covenant, and God takes you back in love. Hold on. Is that 8? And God takes you back in love?
Yeah.
Okay. It says, and this is the Astro, with a slight wrath have I concealed my countenance from you for a moment, but with eternal kindness shall I show you mercy, says your Redeemer Hashem. That's the English of line 8.
yeah, I don't think it's that. You know what, Ziggy, I will take a look at it and I will send you a note to figure out what is the Hebrew. I still don't have my books in my office. I haven't brought them over from the North
You don't
Campus.
have memorized?
So I do not have a Chumash in front of me. I am sorry. Okay, I want to focus, he's going to focus on this verse here. Unhappy, storm-tossed one, uncomforted. I will lay carbuncles at your building stones and make your foundations of sapphire. So let's jump now to the Degel. And he says, based on what I taught in my last teaching, we can now interpret the Haftarah. So the first question we have to say is, what was the last teaching? We can't understand this teaching unless we know what he taught. So here's a footnote. The previous teaching is an exposition of the opening verse of Ra'eh. Behold, I place before you today blessing and curse. Focusing on the word Anochi, the divine self, our teacher concludes that divinity itself is what has been placed before us in the text of the Torah. In other words, when God says, see, this day I set before you blessing and curse, he's reinterpreting that to say, see, I am placed before you. I physically, God, am before you. God isn't making a statement about some general rules that he's putting before the people of Israel. He's saying, I'm putting my presence before you. That's the way the Degel is interpreting this. Why? What does that mean? Let's go a little bit further. Let me reiterate, I'm in here, right? So focusing on the word Anochi, the divine self, is what has been placed before us in the text of the Torah. Yet the text remains like a lifeless body until we invest it with feeling and awareness and inner life. When the rungs of body, the text itself, heart and mind come together, they create a vessel for the divine self to become manifest through our study. It is then that our study becomes a source of blessing. So he's teaching something quite radical here. What he's suggesting is that God didn't give us the Torah as a separate book. God embedded within the Torah itself God's divine presence. Don't think with your rational mind. Like when I pick up this book, right? This book is just this book. But what God is suggesting, or that what the Degel is suggesting, is that if this was the Torah, it's not just the words that God gave us, it's God itself is within this Torah. And when we study the Torah properly, we bring to life that divine presence that is already there. Are you following along?
Kind of.
A rabbi,
George.
something interesting here. The word robots or marbits is in the present. And I lay down these stones. It's not I will, I do now. So it's in the present that this is happening.
Nice.
It's not like I did it or I will do it, I do it.
Okay, thank you. Nice. So much of the way that the Torah speaks is
Yeah.
it speaks in the present, not in the past.
Okay.
So we have an opportunity, what the Degel is saying here is to bring life to Torah in a way that we can't imagine. When we approach it like any other book, it remains lifeless. We don't experience God's presence in it. But when we engage in the proper way with feeling and awareness, then we begin to encounter the actual presence of God. That's what he's suggesting. He's saying that we have the power to transform our learning into something more than just rote learning. We're not reading the words of God. We're encountering God, God's self, in the moment when we study wholeheartedly.
Right.
Marilyn.
It's a combination of, well, maybe it's the same thing almost, kavanah plus mindfulness. You have to be open to what you're reading, ready for it.
Exactly. Like if you can really notice the power of the moment, then you experience that moment in a very different way. If you just see the moment as one of many moments, then you lose the power of that. If the Torah is just like any other book, and that's the way we approach it, then we lose the power to know that this is a book that is actually infused with divine presence. Lisa?
Thank you. Very beautiful. I just love this. Very beautiful. Can you remind me, though, this is his commentary to what we read before in the Haftorah, his commentary to that?
We're going to get, he's only setting it up. All he's doing is laying the groundwork for something that we're going to get to.
Thank you.
And I want to make a comparison. So what he's saying is, how many times have you, and this is on my mind because I just recorded a video for the Shabbat video for that's going to come out. How many of you have ever been in a moment where you are walking by or driving by a homeless person and you see wretchedness in that person? Like, have you walked by the street or driven on a street where you actually see another human being lying on the ground, surrounded by the, stuff that they've collected in life, their whole possessions, and there's filth and there's degradation, and you look at this and you say, oh my God, this is a human being. And then you move on, because we have to move on, because we have our lives to live. Or you look at that person on the street and you say, right, how tragic that this individual is actually an image of the divine presence on this earth. And what have we created as a society that allows this to happen? Not that we can fix everything, that we're, but just the overwhelmingness of the fact that this is actually an image of God that's lying on the face of the ground in dirt and in filth. Right? How do we approach humanity? How do we approach each other? Do we approach each other casually? Or do we approach each other with the mindfulness that we're actually experiencing the face of God? Because isn't it that what it says in the Torah when God says, I created male and female in Genesis? I created them in my image. We are, each one of us, the image of God. Sometimes we're aware of that, and sometimes we're not aware of that. It's the same idea that he's capturing. So let's continue. That was the footnote. Based on what I taught in my last teaching, which is now that we have the potential of experiencing God in Torah when we mindfully approach that, we can now interpret the Haftarah, which says, stormy, impoverished one, inconsolable. Behold, I, Anochi, will adorn your stones with garnets and lay you on a foundation of sapphires. Right? Once upon a time, you suffered terribly, God says, but now I will elevate you. I will make you special. All your borders will become stones of desire. He could be speaking about individuals as Israelites, or he could be speaking about the land of Israel, of what God did to the land of Israel in destroying it. Continues, for it is known that no one is poor except in awareness. So what is the nature of being inconsolable? It's that poverty and degradation is not physical poverty and degradation, he's suggesting, but spiritual poverty and degradation. That's the opposite of the verse, my servant will be wise. When we are aware and wise, we rise exceedingly high. Yet when we are poor in awareness, we are stormy and inconsolable. So what the Degel is suggesting is don't read the Haftarah literally as a response to events that transpired in the history of the Israelite nation and their relationship to the land of Israel. Don't read it that way. It's a metaphor for describing ourselves. When we are using our minds and our awareness, we are like adorned with stones and garnets and are laid on a foundation of sapphire. But when we are acting in a way that is mindless, unaware, then we are stormy and inconsolable. Okay, that's what he's setting up. He continues, behold, I, meaning when Torah study is carried out lishma, the Torah being called Anochi, we already know that because Anochi, God's presence, resides in the Torah. I will adorn your stones with garnet, referring to the letters, that is all 22 letters, and lay you on a foundation of sapphires, connoting clarity, namely that all our letters shine and they become pure and polished. Let's take a look at the footnote. In the classic rabbinic understanding, studying lishma for its own sake is understood as study that has no practical application. But in Hasidic thought, studying Torah for her sake means for the sake of unifying the Shekhinah, the divine body, with the holy and blessed one, meaning that we have focus and awareness. And look at the second note, based on the Kabbalistic teaching that each of us has the entire Torah and its building blocks, which are the Hebrew letters within us. These letters come to connote our inner Torah, the subtle terrain of our inner lives. So we've now just taken a bigger step. I want to go through this slowly with you because this is not easy. Step number one, when we study Torah mindfully, we unlock the presence of God. That's step one. Step two is we don't need to study Torah by looking at a separate book like the Chumash or the scroll. Why? Because the Torah is each one of us. We have within us all of the divine letters of all the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. And those letters are divine. We have an inner Torah in each one of us, meaning that God inhabits each one of us when we are aware of that. That's what he's trying to say. Are you following? Do you get it? Or are you completely and utterly lost? Stan.
Well, pardon me. I study Torah weekly and daily for that matter, but in much different ways than it was studied in this time. To me, it's been an evolution of the way that we study. We live in the age of Sepharia. They lived in a totally different age where they were looking at things, let's say, in a more fundamental or whatever, but we have resources and can study in ways that they never could.
Oh, for sure. But I think here, Stan, he's not talking so much about what we're actually studying, but the way we're actually
The way we are.
Yeah, the way we're actually engaging in life. Beverly, did you want to say something before?
Yes and no. I don't know how to frame it yet. Because I am on, right?
Yeah.
I'm conflicted because, for example, we just finished a book about, it dealt with the Holocaust and life in the camps and what the people had to do to survive. And what they had to do was horrific. And they realized that, but it was a matter of survival to do it. How does that, okay, that's mindfulness, or is it a lack of mindfulness? And
No,
do you put survival above mindfulness?
It's a really, thank you for your example, Beverly. Here, so I imagine all of us have been exposed to a good amount of literature on the Holocaust. And we read narratives about people who survived in a absolutely uninhabitable moment. And there were people who did it with dignity and with never forgetting their humanity, the way they treated other people who were in Auschwitz, for example. And then there are people who behaved ruthlessly and did whatever they could to survive. Now, it is certainly not for me to pass judgment on anybody on how they survived the Shoah, right? How I might have been in a moment where my life depended on that little piece of bread. I have no idea. I can't even begin to imagine. But what I could say, perhaps, is that some people, Beverly, were more able to remember the divine spark within them and others as they suffered terribly. And some may have had momentary lapses of awareness. But the goal is, what he's teaching us is that if we can hold on to the fact that we have the actual divine presence within us, then that might trigger us to behave in a different way in our lives. The Hebrew alphabet, the letters are embedded. We are Torah, each one of us. We don't just read Torah, we are Torah. That's what he's saying. What does it mean to be Torah? Right? What does it mean to be the physical expression of the divine on this earth? In any circumstances, whether we have total freedom or no freedom whatsoever. Lisa.
Thank you. I'm understanding. I have my mind wrapped around what you're teaching or what they're teaching here. And I still have an image that you presented to us a moment ago before we started reading this of that homeless person laying on the sidewalk with filth around them. And so what I'm having trouble doing is wrapping my head around this teaching in relation to something like that. So are we to look at the divine within us and that Torah within us so that we behave differently when we view something? And what about that person that's laying there that has the divine image of Torah, as you suggest, within them, within all of us?
Well, I think minimally what it does, Lisa, is it challenges us to ask ourselves, what are we capable of doing to bring divinity out in any given moment of our lives? And while I may not be able to fix all of societal ills, am I doing anything to contribute to a lessening of the degradation of another human being in the world in which I live? Right? As minor as that may be, right? You know, when Ziggy engages our community once a month in making sandwiches and little, bags for the homeless, that is not something that is going to create a societal shift in the problem of homelessness and hunger in Los Angeles. It's not, right? It's just not going to do that. But is it a meaningless act? Or does it remind us that every one of us can stay at home one night and make 24 sandwiches and drop those off at the synagogue so that they can be delivered to people who might not have even a simple loaf of bread? And it reminds us of the power and the capacity that each of us has to be God's hands and feet in this world. And while I may not be able to fix that individual person lying on the street, I'm going to make sure to vote and to fight and to elect individuals in my district who have made fighting homelessness a priority. And I may volunteer, and I may write letters, and I may protest, and there may be lots of things that I can do because the person lying on the ground is another human being who has the divine Torah in him or her as well. Lauren.
So what just kept coming to mind is the opposite of that, where people are given too much and they're raised with too much and their parents help them too much and everything comes very easy to them and they have like no coping skills. So that's what I kept thinking about, that their parents buy them into the best colleges and they end up with the best jobs. And it's like when there's a little blip, they fall apart. And that's what, so I kept thinking about the opposite of that. The opposite of the guy lying on the street is the one, in the corner office who can't cope at all if something doesn't go their way. And
For sure.
And
Right.
that was the other side of that. And, you know, I don't know if any of you have experienced the mean girl syndrome. If you have a daughter and they know they might have been exposed to mean girls, but the mean girl syndrome is alive and well. I mean, even my little granddaughter I was watching, they sent home these little videos, and she's 2.5, and she's sitting there with this other little girl, and she said, "Your hair is orange," and the little girl says, "No, my hair is long and blonde." And I'm thinking, you're 2.5, and they're already like little mean girls. But it's like, I don't know how you stop that syndrome, you know, where they have too much and they get too much and they expect too much, and everything comes to them so easily, you know, and then the least little thing they're out, you know.
I agree. I think that is the opposite of the person lying on the street. And when we take care of everyone, when we take care of all of the needs of another, we are not dignifying them either, and reminding them that they have the capacity to grow without us. And we're not giving them the benefit of the godliness that's within them. For sure.
And doesn't it feel much better if you worked on it, you know, you worked on it on your own, you've achieved it on your own?
Yeah, I don't think you need to convince anybody on this screen, Lauren, of the value of not doing everything for another person. We all, yeah, for sure. George.
Yeah, the paradox is, I don't have that in front of me, but the poor, you always have the poor. In other words, Hashem is supplying us with poor people. He's not solving it. Your job, of course, is to work on it.
Beautiful,
There's always going
George.
to be poor people. You're not going to solve it according to this.
Thank you. Absolutely. So later on in the Torah portion, in
Yeah.
chapter 15, in this week's Torah portion, there's a whole discussion about the fact that God first says it's our obligation to rid society of poverty. And then 2 verses later, the Torah says, but we'll never rid society of poverty. There will always be the poor, which George is suggesting is a constant reminder to us that we, as God's partners, have the power to bring divinity to those who are lying on the street.
Look at the opportunity. You have an opportunity to perform a mitzvah. He's giving you an opportunity right there.
For sure. Yeah. George, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I want to jump for a minute to Rabbi Feinsmith's commentary. We're going to skip the rest of the Degel because it's tough. But I think there's a rich discussion that we can have here in the remaining 15 minutes. So he says, this is a teaching about the habits of study that lead us from mindlessness to mindfulness, enabling us to discover the precious gems of our inner lives, the letters or building blocks of our own psyche, to make them transparent and radiant. Yet above all, it is a teaching on restlessness and equanimity, pointing to the roots of dissatisfaction and craving that undercut our inner calm and provide a map for cultivating a greater sense of contentment and balanced acceptance wherever we may find ourselves. So he's playing with, which I didn't read, but we'll read it very quickly here. All your borders, we're back at the Degel, all your borders will become stones of desire. Sometimes we desire to be in other places because we imagine that somewhere else is better than where we are right now, right? That's rootlessness. Sometimes we desire to be in other places because we imagine that somewhere else is better than where we are right now. I'm sure we've all had that experience. I can tell you, right, that when we're sitting in a place that's incredibly difficult for us to be in, we always imagine we can be in a better place, right? I was going to say in Hawaii on vacation, but poo. May all of those people that are suffering terribly right now in Maui and on the Big Island find respite and health and healing. What a terrible thing it is. So the root cause for this tendency is that we truly wish to be in awe of the one's glorious and awesome name. Each of us wishes to do tikkun, But when we do not rectify, when we do not do tikkun, we feel we are missing something. We do not know what is truly missing, so we conclude that our place is not good. Yet when we can rectify, in other words, when we can be focused, then all the holy sparks and all our attributes, the divine presence rests where we are, as it were. So that's this notion that he's saying here about the difference between restlessness and equanimity. I'm continuing with this second paragraph now. Rabbi Moshe Chaim is riffing on a classic Mishnaic teaching. Ben Zoma said, who is truly wealthy? One who is happy with their lot. Hasameach bechelko. The original Hebrew chelko refers literally to a plot of land, paving the way for Rosh Chaim's reflections on cultivating contentment in our physical place. So I want to ask you, right? When do you feel their agitation? And when do you feel that you are in the midst of like being like a stormy, inconsolable woman? And when do you feel that you are well established on a foundation of clarity and calm? In other words, what are the moments in your life that you feel anxious and agitated? And where are those moments when you really do feel a sense of clarity and calmness? Marilyn.
Well, when I feel inconsolable or agitated, when I feel that I can't control my environment, can't control what's going on with me, and that I don't recognize gratitude for, what I have versus what I'm thinking I don't have. And I feel more equanimity, common clarity when I recognize the gratitude, for what I have, what I've achieved, where I'm at,
So beautiful, Marilyn. So I think that's common. When we feel desire, want, needs, it's hard to also feel gratitude in those moments. And desire, want, needs can potentially lead us to anxiety. When agitation. When we accept whatever it is that we have in gratitude, that can calm us and allow for a certain amount of clarity. Beautiful. Anita.
I have become very comfortable going to shul on Shabbos morning or tuning in online. And even if it's just for half an hour, that sense of calmness really helps me make my week.
Nice. Thank you, Anita. I think for many people who are willing to make the sacrifice and say that it's true, I never will run out of things that I need to do, activities that I must accomplish, errands that I have to run, versus those who can say, as busy as I am, I will make the time, whether it's in person in synagogue or sitting on my couch and focused on the screen, to be present in this moment and not worry about what I have to do afterwards. And if we could achieve that, we feel that sense of calm and clarity that Anita just described. And Anita, I think you're in the minority, not amongst the people who are sitting in this Zoom class right now, but the minority amongst our fellow Americans.
Yeah, unfortunate.
Fewer and fewer people take the time to separate their lives and spend it in worship. However that is defined, worship. Other thoughts about moments when you feel like the Degel's agitated, stormy, inconsolable woman, or moments when you feel you are well established on a foundation of clarity and calm. Nancy.
It depends on who you're with and the situation that you're in at the time.
So beautiful. So what Nancy is suggesting to us is that sometimes it's not about where we are, but it's about with whom we are. And when we surround ourselves with the right people, it's very easy or easier to feel a sense of clarity and calmness. And when we surround ourselves by people who are the wrong people, we may feel that agitation and storm. Nancy, for me, when I watch the news and I see talking heads yelling and screaming, I feel agitation and not clarity. And I have to turn off the news because I say, I can't hang out with those people because all that does is lead me to agitation. So I think you're absolutely right. Who we stand with and connect with definitely leads us to that sense. Stan and then Lauren.
I feel when I count my blessings every day, which I do, and realize how blessed I am to be who I am, live where I am, where I do, and everything that I have, and that it's my responsibility to live my blessing by sharing, by teaching, by whatever I do in my life. That's the time. And you're right that when I listen to the news or read the paper, that's the worst time.
Thank you, Stan. Absolutely. Thank you. Lauren.
Yeah, when I have like those aha moments, like you were saying, when I'm mindful, like if I'm walking down the street and I say, look at where I live, look at these houses. This is not how I grew up, how fortunate I am to live here. My aha moments, if I'm with my grandchildren and I look at how I've known them since they're born, and look at the things that they are able to do. Or my aha moments, I've celebrated 48 years of marriage with my husband, and we're both still married. And then my agitated moments when I start playing situations in my head that I'm anticipating are going to happen, and they're not really going to be happening, and I get myself all into a tizzy, like thinking they're going to happen, and I have to calm myself down. I try very, Musar does help that, why make yourself crazy before the fact's actually going to happen.
That's great. So Lauren offers us just yet another example that I think we can hold on to, which is living in the future and imagining that future can create agitation.
Oh, God, yeah.
Living in the present and holding on to everything that is in this moment may minimize that kind of agitation. So I would invite us, as we come to a conclusion, right, to think about what are some of the things that we can do, right, in the next day, in the next week, this Shabbat, that support our inner calm and that remind us of the divinity that is within us, and try to hold on to those things and notice when we move away from that. Notice when we find ourselves feeling that kind of impoverishment or inner agitation, and then bring ourselves back. That's what I would suggest. We have to stop. Before we stop, I want to ask all of you a question, because you exemplify a community of learners. And so I want to ask you just your opinion, not requiring you to do anything. But if we were to teach a Elul class, Elul, for the month of Elul in preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, if we were to teach a class that prepares ourselves emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically to enter into the high holy days, and we were to do it on Zoom, so it's easy for people, or a hybrid where people can come, and we were doing it in the afternoon or evening, what time do you think works best for our community? Like a 5 to 6:30 or a 7:30 to 9? What do you think is easier for people? Just by show of hands, how many of you would prefer a class from 5 to 6:30 before the dinner hour? And how many of you would prefer a class after the dinner hour in the evening?
Before.
Did you guess?
Before,
Before.
Before.
the dinner hour.
Okay, and those
Especially-
of you,
No,
yeah,
Rabbi,
Linda, yeah.
yeah, 5 to 6:30 would be fine for us because we're retired, but if you want to get younger people, 5 o'clock is very early there. Some of them aren't home from work yet.
Or they have small children that
Or
they
they
have
have-
to take care of.
Actually,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the conversation that I had with Avram Elner, who is the teacher who's going to be teaching the class. I said, let's figure out who is our audience. If the audience are young people, then 5 o'clock is an impossible time, as you said.
Middle-aged people, most
But-
people.
Maybe
but-
work.
teach 2 classes.
I think for
Or
young
working.
people, if they have a family, young children, no matter what time, they're busy all
I
the
agree.
time.
I
7:30
agree.
They have no
agree.
time.
7:30 is not a great, that's better.
Okay, all right, I appreciate this feedback, thank you. It's
Bill,
very,
Bill, it is an early bird special and you'll
yeah.
get.
That's good.
5 is dinner, 7:30 is bed and bath, so it's better.
Thank you,
Rabbi,
Leora.
did you get my email? Because it came bouncing back. to me.
I did get it,
Okay.
yes. Thank you, Lauren.
Rabbi, I have a question regarding what we studied. And one of the things that I don't completely understand, of course, a lot of them, but the one that you state, we are Torah, the Torah is within us, the letters of the Torah are within us. And I'm referring to many people that maybe not feeling that way, or even rejecting the fact that Torah is embedded in them.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what I think it means is that each one of us has the capacity to get hold of calmness within us, because God has given us all of the tools to be able to do that. That doesn't mean that we don't sometimes need, outside resources to help us, but we have the capacity to focus on what is, as opposed to what we wish would be. And when we focus on what is and what we have, and the blessings that are derived from what is and what we have, then that is touching base with the inner divinity within us and the Torah that's in us.
Thank you.
I have to run to a 1 o'clock meeting, so unfortunately, but I'm really glad there's hands, because that means that as difficult as the Degel is, somehow we got to a point of a rich conversation.
Yeah.
And I hope that I will see you all back here again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.